Isha Parikh, I think we should start.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. A blissful morning to one and all present over here. I, Isha Parekh of BLLB second year, heartily welcomes you all for the guest lecture on the topic Status of Tribal Rights in India. Achieving social justice is one of the significant goals set in the Indian Constitution. Equality before law and equal protection of law is a fundamental rights guaranteed to Indian perspective of their religion, race, caste, sex, and a place of birth. In this context, understanding the status of tribes in India is a crucial facet of it. In the 71st year of independence, it is surely interesting to review the status of tribal rights in India. Think India Tribal Rights Forum is a collaboration with Dr. D.Y. Patil Law College has organized a talk on status of tribal rights in India. We are privileged to have a collaboration with Think India Tribal Rights Forum under the project Eklavya. Today, we are lucky to have a Mr. Vikrant Bursi as a guest speaker for this lecture. Now, I would like to request my friend Ms. Isha Goyal to introduce the guest speaker.
Thank you, Isha Parekh. Greetings, everyone. I, Isha Goyal of BLLB second year, counts an immense pleasure to introduce you all with the resource person of today's workshop, Mr. Vikrant Barse. Mr. Barse is an electrical and electronics engineer graduated from Vellore Institute of Technology. He is also a plant technician for Reliance Industries Limited and as an automobile designer at General Motors Technical Center, India. But his work could not suppress his interest in law. Mr. Barse is currently a sophomore at the National Law University and Judicial Academy, Assam. Other than this, he is the internship coordinator at Think India Tribal Rights Forum. Here, he examines the interaction between tribes and the legal system. Now, before moving forward, I request each and every member to listen the event instructions carefully. Everyone requested to keep their devices mute to avoid any counts. All should maintain the decorum and the professionalism. If any participant found creating nuisance will be removed. Please drop the questions or queries in the chat box only. Now, with not taking much of your time, I would like to hand over the speaker to Sir to enlighten all of us about the tribal rights. Thank you.
Am I audible? I'll first start with that. That generally becomes a problem. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. First of all, I'll thank you so much for those kind words and introduction. And it's an honor to be, amongst my fellow lawyers and faculties of law. And as I represent Think India Tribal Rights Forum, I will also use this opportunity to talk about what exactly is tribal rights, what exactly is tribal laws. So I'll just share my screen and then we can move on. Could I know if it's visible if my screen is visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we'll just start off. So now this as an internship coordinator is something that I have always encountered or something that I've always faced. But when it comes to tribal laws, when it comes to tribal rights, that is something that you cannot just say, okay, go at this location or, look it up under this so and so statute. And that is where the problem starts. It's because tribal laws in India, as they are, is a very multi-dimensional approach or a multi-lens approach.
श्वेता कम्प्युटर्स मध्ये
Is there some issue?
No, sir, please continue.
So the thing is, now we're going to use this presentation, or we're going to use this session in order to look at what those dimensions are. We're going to look at the three facets, which according to me are the constitution itself, obviously the supreme rule of the land. Then you have judicial interpretations. Just as the judiciary is rightfully called as the guardian of the Constitution of India, the interpretations by them when it comes to different provisions of the Constitution is extremely important when we need to study about tribal laws. And finally, we will be looking at certain legislative statutes. How have the legislature or how have the legislative assemblies looked up or taken up this issue of tribal laws and tribal rights? So first we'll get into the Constitution itself. So now the biggest issue that exists when it comes to tribal laws or tribal rights or tribal privileges is that there's no definition as such put for what is a tribe. Now, this is not just our issue at hand, and it is not just something that is limited to India. In a lot of constitutions across the world, in a lot of intergovernmental organizations, the definition of tribe has always been withheld. Like, you'll never see a clear-cut definition of what is a tribe or what is, a minority tribe. Now, you might ask, why did the Constituent Assembly not think of defining what is a tribe? Now, there's always a two-forked answer to this. One part of the argument says that the Constituent Assembly decided to not define what is a tribe in order to create a flexible approach in its interpretation. So they kept a very futuristic foresight in mind that, its interpretation might change as per time, it might change as per requirements and circumstances. So let's not give it a stringent and rigid definition. At the same time, another logic behind not defining what is a tribe is because of the limited information that tribal representation had around 1945 and 50. Because it wasn't until the Government of India Act 1935 that tribals were put into political mainstream. They were represented as the backward classes, also called the depressed classes. But it wasn't until 1935 that the Government of India Act thought of giving representation to the depressed sections of society. So the Constituent Assembly did not have much to work with when it comes to giving a definition for a tribe, but nonetheless, it has given a procedure. It has given a provision as to how you could define a tribe, rather than giving you, like a dictionary version of what is a tribe. So the definition of a tribe, also called as a scheduled tribe in India, is given in Article 342 of the Indian Constitution. Now, mind you, this was not there in the original Constitution, although the Constituent Assembly added it with the first amendment in 1951, which was the first constitutional amendment. Now, the idea behind Article 342 is that it is the sole discretion of the President of India. So, if the President of India feels that a particular tribe or a particular tribal community in a particular state, either spread across the state or localized at a particular section of the state, deems or can be called as a tribe, scheduled tribe, or can be given the status of a scheduled tribe, then the President of India can consult with the governor of the state. Obviously, the President of India cannot take a unilateral decision. Although the discretionary power stays with the President of India, he or she ought to consult with the governor of the state, especially if the scheduled tribe in question resides generally in the given state. Now, if the president is convinced, if the president has enough material evidences, both oral and documentary, if the president is convinced, then the president will release a public notification by which the particular tribe or tribal community will now be called as a scheduled tribe under Article 342. So you see, there is no definition. It comes to the discretion. So the President of India can now think about, okay, is this tribe socially backward, educationally backward, economically deficient, do they need the protection of the tag of a scheduled tribe? And that can change from time to time. So you see, instead of providing a definition of what is a tribe, the constitution goes ahead and gives you a procedure to maintain a sort of a flexibility. Now, obviously, just like everything else in the Constitution of India, this liberal approach that was taken for Article 342 has been challenged time and again. So we look into certain judicial interpretations as to the Constitution, as we already discussed at the start of the session. We will look into judicial interpretations. So the first major case that came along to the Supreme Court of India in 1965 was the case of it's B. Basava Lingappa v. D. Munichinnappa. It was a case that came to the Supreme Court of India in 1965. It was a five-judge constitutional bench which consisted of Justice K. N. Banchu, Justice P.B. Gajendra Gadkar, Justice M. Hidayatullah, Justice R. Dayal, and Justice J. R. Mudolkar. And they said that the presidential order, the public notification that is released under Article 342, it is binding. It's final. It's final. You cannot make changes in it unless and until the Union Parliament decides to do it. Unless and until the Union Parliament takes it upon itself to add or subtract certain contents of the presidential order, no one else can touch it. It is only up to the Parliament to alter a presidential order regarding, the inclusion and the exclusion of a scheduled tribe. Now, this decision became the bedrock for a bigger decision. Why? Because the B. Basava Lingappa case was more regarding scheduled castes. So it said that, scheduled caste, it comes right precedent to, or it precedes Article 342, it comes under Article 341. It said that, as I said, that, the Union Parliament is the only one who can alter the presidential order. This understanding was taken up by the Supreme Court again in the year 1990 when the case of Srish Kumar Chaudhary v. the state of Tripura and others came to the Supreme Court. Justice M. Ranganath said that, let's take this understanding of B. Basava Lingappa case and let's add it to scheduled tribes. Can we do that? And the answer was yes. He took those provisions as it is, as was decided in the previous case, and he added it to scheduled tribes. So the same logic remains that if a president gives a presidential order declaring a particular tribe or a tribal community as a scheduled tribe, the addition and subtraction from that presidential order can only be done by the legislative assembly. Even the court of law is not allowed to intervene. Even the court has no jurisdiction in it. The court can inquire into it, no doubt. The court can, gauge the situation if the inclusion or exclusion is constitutional or not. But it cannot invalidate it or it cannot validate it. That jurisdiction doesn't exist with the court. It exists solely with the parliament. And the parliament, on the other hand, just like the president, may use evidences, pieces of evidence. It could be oral and documentary. It could be about, if the education status, economical status, do they need the tag of scheduled tribe in order to, validate the presidential order or not. Now, another case or another thing that you need to understand about scheduled tribe is that the president, as I've already told you, the scheduled tribe may be spread across a state or it might exist in a particular area of the state. And that is also something that the presidential order will carry. So the presidential order will say what particular area of a state carries the scheduled tribe, or it could be all over it. Now, another question came, but this time not to the Supreme Court. It came in 1990, in the same year that Srish Kumar Chaudhary case was being argued in the Supreme Court. In the same year, Gujarat High Court had a very, very interesting case. This is actually a very interesting case if someone wants to understand the relationship between migration and reservation, something that is very relevant in today's times, is the state of Gujarat and another V.R.L. Patel. The case was fought in 1990. The idea was very simple. Let's assume I'm an individual X. I belong to a tribe called ABC, and the tribe has been publicly notified by a presidential order to be a scheduled tribe. That is in a state, say X, or a state. Now let's assume I as an individual now move from state X, which is my state of origin, to another state, which is my state of migration. The question that was asked before the court or the Gujarat High Court was, do I lose my status of, of a scheduled tribe? The court took a very narrow interpretation in this matter and said, no, you don't lose your status. Even if you migrate, or I, as a person, as a member of the scheduled tribe, even if I go to a state where my tribe is not notified as a scheduled tribe, I will still bear the status of a scheduled tribe. But there's a very, very smart but that was added by the Gujarat High Court. They said that you will not get the benefits though. The benefits and concessions that I enjoyed in my home state because of me being from the scheduled tribe, I will not get to enjoy that in the migratory state unless and until the tribe I belong to is also notified as a scheduled tribe by presidential order in the state I'm migrating to. So that was the entire thing that the Gujarat High Court very, very cleanly recognized. But another issue came up with it. That, okay, fine, you're telling me that me migrating to a state allows me to hold on to my status. But then why am I not allowed to take, reap the benefits? Then what's the point of me holding on to a status if I'm not able to get the benefits of reservation? This is where one of the most important judgments of the 21st century up till now, at least in the Supreme Court, was given in 2013. It's the case called the Bir Singh v. Delhi Jal Board and others, where a 5-judge constitutional bench, which we had the former Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi, we have the current Chief Justice N.V. Ramana, Justice M.M. Shantabudar, and Justice S.A. Nazar. They had to now deal with this decision. Do you enjoy your status? If you do, why shouldn't you get to enjoy the benefits and concessions of your reservation? So we can look at this as, let's not look at the judgment, because the judgment is frankly a little confusing for a novice reader. So let's look at it as an example. Let's assume I live in Gujarat. My state of residence is Gujarat. I belong to a tribe, say ABC, which has been notified by a presidential order publicly to be a scheduled tribe in the state of Gujarat. Now I use all the benefits that my reservation gives me in education, in employment, and I'm getting all of it. Now I decide to migrate to Maharashtra. Now let's assume Maharashtra does not recognize ABC. It recognizes it as a tribe, but does not recognize it as a scheduled tribe. Then the Supreme Court unanimously decided, it was a 5-0 judgment, that if the migratory state does not recognize your scheduled tribe as a scheduled tribe, then you will not get your concessions, you will not get your benefits, you will be a normal person in the migratory state. However, if the migratory state does identify you as, as a scheduled tribe in their notification, then you can go ahead with your with your benefits and concessions. Now, another thing was told in this case. The Supreme Court does this a lot. When one question of law is presented before it, it tries to answer something else also with it. Just to clear the air about any auxiliary questions that may exist. So a pressing question that came before the Supreme Court was, what about central reservations? You have the central government reservation in, you have centrally funded jobs, you have centrally funded education institutions. What about that? The court, in a 4:1 split decision, said that it doesn't matter where you go, you will still get the enjoyment of your reservation. So let's assume as in the same example, I am a scheduled tribe in the state of Gujarat, and I want to apply in a central government job in Bihar. Bihar does not recognize tribe ABC as a scheduled tribe. It doesn't matter. It's a central government job. It's a central government employment. So under central government reservation, my scheduled tribe status is valid anywhere in the territory of India. I can go even to Bihar. I can go, I can even go to, say, Bengal and take up, say, the scheduled tribe reservation if it's a central government job or if it's a centrally funded education institution. Now, this is where a very big debate started. This was a very broad, this was the broadest approach the Supreme Court could have taken regarding migratory reservations. The situation that happens is, let's assume now in the state of Maharashtra, you have people who belong to the state of Maharashtra and who are of tribe ABC, scheduled tribe. And now you have migratory people from the state of Gujarat who belong to state tribe ABC. Who do you give more preference to? This is when the court said that always give preference to the state of origin. So if you have to decide reservation in jobs, if you have to in reservation in employment, education, you decide on Maharashtra first and then the migratory. Similar thing, if this was to be done in Gujarat, you decide for Gujarat first and then go for Maharashtra. If both of the individuals have the same tribal standing in scheduled tribes. Now another situation arose. Now you see, we are still on Article 342. The liberal nature of Article 342 has given rise to so many cases. This was just a few that I could pluck out. What if you convert to another religion? This was also a question that was asked to the Supreme Court of India in 2004. The case was the state of Kerala and another V. Chandramohan, and the situation was, if I belong to a scheduled tribe ABC, which is publicly notified by presidential order in a particular state, and I decide to convert to another religion, what do I do? Am I still scheduled tribe? Do I still get reservation benefits of a scheduled tribe? This is where the three-judge divisional bench, consisting of Justice V.N. Khare, Justice S.B. Sinha, and Justice S.H. Kapadia, said that it doesn't matter. If you, as an individual, are a part of a scheduled tribe and you convert to another religion, you will still be part of the scheduled tribe. You'll still get to enjoy the status of the scheduled tribe as long as you follow the traditions, customs, rituals of the scheduled tribe. So if, let's assume hypothetically, I convert to a religion, but I don't follow the traditions of that religion, I still do my tribal customs, tribal traditions, tribal customs, and tribal provisions, then I still get to be a scheduled tribe. But if it is proven by material evidence, by oral and documentary evidence, that I have let go of my tribal heritage, that I now follow the customs, I follow the teachings, I follow the philosophy of this new religion that I've adopted, then the court is like, sorry, then you cannot take the scheduled tribe status. You are no longer an ST and you have to let go of your reservation. So you have to, basically, in a nutshell, it means you can be an ST if you continue following the customs of your tribe, but the moment you let go of it, you are no longer a member of the scheduled tribe. You can't say two boats at once. Okay. Now let's look at the provisions. Let's look at the rights. Let's look at the privileges that we have when it comes to tribal communities. So the first and foremost we have is Article 15, Clause 1, which is it's an extremely simple one. There's no discrimination. You shall have no discrimination on the grounds of sex, on the grounds of religion, race, place of birth. 15.4. Now this is where it gets a little deviant. Like, a lot of people have this doubt that isn't 15.1 and 15.4, contradictory to each other. At one hand, you say 15.1 is no discrimination against any citizen of India. On the other hand, you say that nothing bars a state, be it the Union Parliament or the state legislative assembly, to make any provision for advancement of a scheduled tribe. How is it possible? You're making reservations for one particular tribe, one particular community. How is this not discriminatory? So 15.4 or Article 15, Clause 4 was added after a very important case that was fought in the year 1951. It was called the State of Madras. We Champakam, if I'm butchering the name, I'm extremely sorry. It's V. Champakaram Dorai Rajan. The case led to the First Amendment. So the State of Madras case of 1951 is the case that led to the First Amendment of the Constitution of 1951. And the first thing that was added was Article 15, Clause 4. The Constituent Assembly sought that, you need a provision as a fundamental right to make sure that, the level is made. Because they said that historically, if you look at the Varna system, you look at the Jati system, you look at the caste system, something that the drafter of the constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, called as the ill of Indian society. He said that if you look at all this history, India is not going to progress unless you let go of it. So it was very prudent for the Constituent Assembly to say that we need to make a fundamental right, a binding edict, to make sure that we level the game. So that all these atrocities, all this injustice, all this leaving behind that has been done against the depressed class of society, the backward class of society, that they have been, systemically held back from opportunities of employment and education, that has to get over. So to do that, 15.4 was a very reasonable provision. That okay, you can reasonably make a provision for the advancement of a scheduled tribe. Then we come to Article 16, Clause 1. Now, the best way to remember Article 16 versus Article 15 is Article 16 is a subset of Article 15. Article 15 talks about discrimination across the umbrella. Article 16 talks about employment. Its whole and sole purpose is employment. Because employment, as we have seen, is also a walk of life. It's important. It is so important that Article 19 includes the fundamental freedom of occupation. Having a job, having an employment of choice is important when it comes to living a life with dignity, which is why Article 16 specifically adds employment clauses. So Article 16 Clause 1 says you should have equal opportunity for all citizens of India when it comes to matters of employment. Same thing, Clause 2 of the same article says that you shall not discriminate against any person on the basis of religion, sex, caste, place of descent, place of residence. Which is why if you see when you go to job interviews, or if you go to, you go to specific companies, you will have people from different walks of life. You will have people, you'll have people from depressed classes. You'll have people across genders. You'll have people across India. You'll have people from north, south, east, west. So Article 16.2 tells that no, you cannot discriminate based on these factual facts. Everyone should be given equal opportunity. And then comes the behemoth of Article 16, which is Article 16, Clause 4A, which talks about reservation. Now, if you read a lot of legal news, you might have already figured out why I call Article 16, Clause 4A to be, a behemoth. It's because it talks about reservations not only in appointment, not only at the time of appointment for members of scheduled tribe, but also at the time of promotion. So even during promotion, members of the scheduled tribe can, be given reservation, provided the state is convinced that there is no adequate representation of the scheduled tribe in question in its post or service. So again, let's look at certain judicial interpretations as they exist for each one of them. So one of the most important cases that exists when it comes to Article 15 is the Kati Rani Rawat v. the state of Saurashtra. It was fought in 1952 at the Supreme Court of India. This case single-handedly outlined Article 15. It was so important that every other case that ever was argued regarding Article 15 has cited this case, the Kati Rani Rawat case. It was the 7-judge constitutional bench of Justice N.P. Sastry, Justice S. Faisal Khan, Justice M.C. Mahajan, Justice B.K. Mukherjee, Justice S.R. Das, Justice N.C. Iyer, and Justice V. Bose, who said that, yes, Article 15 talks about no discrimination. But there can be situations when you can have, certain differentiating classifications, certain differentiations. So is all differentiation wrong? Is all differentiation invalid, null, void? They were like, no, this is not the case. A differentiating classification amongst the citizens of India will be valid, will be upheld by the court of law, provided they follow 4 rules. 4 cardinal rules. If they follow it, then it is not discriminatory. If they violate any one of it, it's discriminatory. The first was that the differentiating classification should be based on intelligible differentia. Now, the word differentia or intelligible differentia means a difference that ought to be understood. So let's take an example of this to better understand what is intelligible differentia. Let's assume I'm going to give an examination tomorrow, and the examination center has multiple rooms. It has room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4. It is serialized. We have n number of rooms. Now, before I am allowed inside the examination building, the supervisor says that everyone stand according to your room. Look at your admit card. Look at what room number you have, and make single files. So you have room 1, room 2, room 3, and so on and so forth. Do I get to say this is discrimination? Do I get to go to court and say that this was discrimination? This was violation of Article 15? No, this is not a discriminatory approach. Why? Because the examination department wants only one thing. The examination happens peacefully, the examination happens smoothly, without any chaos, without any lobbying around each of these classrooms. So wouldn't it be prudent to let classroom 1 go first, classroom 2 go first, then 3, then 4, and so on? This is what is called intelligible differentia. That because your classrooms are 1, 2, 3 serialized as 1, 2, 3, your rows that you have made for students is also 1, 2, 3. So this differentiation is understandable. It's okay, fine. Yeah, your rooms are 1, 2, 3. So obviously your rows will be 1, 2, 3. However, now let's assume a different approach to this same problem. Let's assume I, as a supervisor, say that let's stand according to religion. Let's go with say Hindus first, Muslims second, then Christians, then you have Jains, Buddhists. Let's, for the sake of argument, consider you have atheists, then you have Sikhs, and then you have other minorities clubbed into a separate row. Is this discriminatory? And the answer will be yes. The 7-judge constitutional bench will say yes, this is discrimination. Why? Because your classrooms are based on serialized numbers, but your classification is based on religion. It makes no sense, because the moment you let the students inside, there will be lobbying, there will be chaos, because certain people will belong to, let's assume in Hindus itself, certain Hindus will go to first class, certain will go to second class, certain will go to room number 3, certain will go to room number 4, and so on. So it makes you're not, this is not intelligible differentiation. This is not a differentiation that is ought to be understood. Another criteria is it must not be arbitrary. Now, this is something that as a law student, I would always suggest lawyers to understand, is that Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, if you have to summarize in one sentence, arbitrariness and reasonableness can never be friends. You will never see them together. You will never have reasonable arbitrariness, or you will never have arbitrarily reasonable. These two terms will never be used together. So if something is arbitrary, it's not going to be reasonable. If something is reasonable, it's not going to be arbitrary. It's like an antithesis of each other. So again, this, standing in rows based on religion, it's arbitrary. It's not reasonable. Third criteria is it should have a rational nexus. The objective that I want to do is that there should be no chaos, there should be no commotion outside the examination rooms. Is my classification fulfilling this objective? Yes, I'm allowing one class to go after the other. My objective is being fulfilled, so this classification should be upheld. Fourth, the classification should be rational and justified. As you see, it is justified. I get to fulfill my rational objective. And so based on these 4 criteria, you can know if a differentiating classification is discriminatory or not. Now, this case was, condensed into 2 cases. First, if I so may use, first was called as the DS Nakarao and others versus the Union of India 1983 case, where it was said intelligible differentia And then we have the case of Sri Ramakrishna Dalmia v. Sri Justice S.R. Tendolkar and others. It was a 1958 case where it spoke about rational nexus. So these four criteria can actually be summarized into two criteria: intelligible differentia and rational nexus to the object sought to be achieved by your differentiating classification. Another case that sort of looked into Article 16 and Article 15, it's somewhere in the middle, was the Mohanveer Singh Chawla v. Punjab University, Chandigarh, and another. It was a 1997 case in the Supreme Court of India. It was important because what had happened is Punjab University was conducting admissions for its LLB course, and it had a criteria in its circular that everyone will be given admission based on merit on their qualifying examination. However, those students who have qualified examination from Punjab University will be given 10% extra marks. This was challenged in the Supreme Court by the students. Is this allowed? Would this satisfy the test of intelligible differentia and reasonable nexus? This is where it was upheld and downheld at the same time. This was one of those cases where the judgment was so exhaustively written that it is still used today when we talk about reservations in education institutions. So there are three kinds of reservations in an education institution. You have university-wise preference. Now let's assume you have, let's take Mumbai University. Mumbai University decides that, for admission to a particular course, we would give preference to students from Mumbai University itself. We would give preference to students from universities, educational entities, colleges affiliated to Mumbai University. The court in this case, in the Mohanveer Singh Chawla case, said that this is reasonable, this is valid, provided you reasonably give such a reservation and preference. You can't give 100% to your own people. This makes sense according to the court because according to them, it is reasonable to provide preference to students from your own institute to give admissions into super specialty courses in your institute, knowing that the student has done their undergraduate studies from your institute itself. So it allows you to have a leveling field. Every university, every college, every education entity has different examination patterns. So wouldn't it be prudent that a university with its examination pattern and a student who has faced that examination pattern continue in the same university? It is reasonable, it is just. And indeed, a lot of education institutions across the country do that. If you pass from a university, you get a little bit of preference if you continue to do your higher studies in the same university, provided this preference is reasonable. So initially, in the Mohanveer Singh Chawla case, the court said that the university, this preference that you give to students from your own university or your own affiliated education entities cannot exceed more than 80%. At the same time, the amount of students that you take from the all India level, from universities and education institutions, which are not affiliated to your university, cannot exceed 20%. So that 80 to 20. 80% from your own institute and 20% from your own, from all India. If you want to look into this, how does this work? You can easily look into any national law university. You can, if you want, you can look into, say, the Mumbai National Law University. They follow this in a stricter fashion. You have this situation where home university is given more preference than the all India level. It's an 80 to 20. However, in the case of Dr. Dinesh Kumar and others, Motilal Nehru Medical College, Allahabad and others, 1985, this became 85 and 50, where the preference given to home or to your own institutes, to your own educational affiliations was at 85%. It can't exceed 85%. and to that of the all India level or to people from other education institutions or other university affiliations will be given 15% of the total seats for that particular course. College-wise preference was deemed invalid. You cannot say, okay, I will only pick from one college. You cannot say, for example, if let's assume, let's take an education, let's assume you have an educational institution X, and it says that I will only take people who have passed out from X. I will not take people from any other education institution. I will not take people from any other education entity. Then that is unreasonable. You are limiting yourself only to your own college. What is your rational nexus here? At the end of the day, reservation is meant to uplift the depressed society. It's to get them on the same leveling field, is to get them on the same, with the same educational provisions, economic upliftment, economic freedom. But by giving preference to only your college, a single educational entity, you are not fulfilling this nexus. You're not fulfilling the objective of social upliftment. So you are violating the clause as mentioned in the previous case, which was the previous case of not fulfilling your rational nexus. At the same time, domicile-wise preference was again held valid. It should not exceed certain reasonable limitations. The limitations depends from state to state because the state to state reality is different. Every state will have different realities for a scheduled tribe. The conditions can be different. The atrocities faced by it can be different. The hardships faced by it can be different. So based on the ground realities, the reasonable limitation mentioned here can change from state to state. But domicile-wise preference is also not wrong because you as a state are saying that no, I will first do upliftment for my own people. I will provide economic upliftment, educational facilities, quality education to scheduled tribes from my own state. So domicile, I will provide it to my own people and then I will go for the all India. Then I will do the 15% extra from all India or other people or other domiciles. But I will first provide a reservation for my own people. Is this justified? Is this not discriminatory? No, because domicile-wise preference has an intelligible differential. Yes, I as a state understand my crisis better. I know for a fact that there are tribes in my state which do not get educational facilities, which do not get economic upliftment. So to solve that, I should provide the logical thing to do is to provide a reservation to your own state first. So you can. At the same time, you have your rational nexus. Is domicile by preference allowing you to have social upliftment? Yes. If you see over time, especially Maharashtra, you have people from tribal communities, you have people from far-fledged places, rural areas of Maharashtra, who are now coming to get education in urban areas or in education institutions established in semi-rural areas because domicile-wise preference is valid. So yes, you have a rational nexus. So the Sri Ramakrishna Dalmia case is upheld. This is a rational nexus. You are causing socio-economic upliftment. Go ahead with your reservation. Now, the case that everyone loves. Every person who's given CLAT knows Kesavananda Bharati, 1973, and knows the Indra Sawhney case. The two cases which, I myself which was argued in the Supreme Court of India, a record, it was in the highest, obviously, but a record 9 judges sat and thought about what is this reasonable limit that we saw in the previous case, the domicile reservation. What is this reasonable limit? Should we cap it? The states argued no. every state has its own limitations, has its own socioeconomic shortcoming. How can you make a rigid limit? The talk of the town at that time was to have a rigid limit of 50%. This was seen in the Indrashani case, in which Justice S.R. Pandian said that the 50% limitation that is being put on states and union territories for reservations in its, domicile specific reservation should be scrapped. He said that, the thing that we said in M.R. Balaji, now the idea that there should be 50% limitation on reservations or 50% limitation on cumulative reservation for a state and union territory comes from the M.R. Balaji and others v. State of Mysore 1962 case. But Justice S.R. Pandian said that, that was not legally binding. That was an obiter dicta. He just said it. That, what, you could have it. You ought to have a 50% upper limit. But it was an obiter dicta. We did not mean it at that time. It was a remark. And that's the percentage, that the reasonable limitation that you ought to put on your scheduled tribes changes from state to state. Depends upon the ground realities, prevailing circumstances that exist in that state. The atrocities, the hindrances, the obstacles change from state to state. The hindrances that I face in, say, Gujarat are different from the hindrances I face as a tribe in Maharashtra or that I face in the state of Karnataka. So this percentage cannot be hard limit 50. Then Justice Kuldeep Singh, Justice T.K. Thoman, and Justice R.M. Sahai said, no, we have to have a hard limit. 50%, you don't go over it under any circumstances. You do not even think of exceeding it. Then came the majority opinion, which was a 5-judge. It was a 5-judge unanimous decision given by Justice Jeevan Reddy, Justice M.N. Kanya, Justice A.M. Amadi, Justice M.N. Atachalya, and Justice P.B. Samar. They said that, we won't take an approach that the rest of these two parties have taken. One is rigid and one is not rigid. We will take a middle ground. We will take a middle stand here and say that, yes, the limitation of 50% ought to be followed as a cumulative reservation limitation. However, it can be breached. It's not a rigid limit. Extraordinary circumstances can exist. You can have a particular tribe which has very special peculiarities. You can have a very special tribal community which is not included in national mainstream, which has very, very, very extraordinary circumstances. For such tribes, if you have to make a reservation, and if in such situation your cumulative reservation shoots beyond 50%, it's okay. This is what the 5 judges said. It's okay. You are at the end of the day trying to get this tribe, which is outside national mainstream, you're trying to get them also above. Why should only certain tribes get the benefit of reservation while excluding other tribes? So in order to cause a cohesive upheaval or a cohesive economic upliftment for all scheduled tribes, the 5 judges said that yes, you can breach it. You can very well breach it if it is required, if it's reasonable to do it for that particular special peculiar tribal community. Now, the Indra-Shawnee case, the other part, first part was what is this reasonable limit? Is 50% a reasonable limit? Another thing that Indra-Shawnee case was arguing that there was an observation Indra-Shawnee made that why is reservation being given at promotion level? If Article 16, Clause 4 of the Indian Constitution clearly says that reservation is to be given only at times of appointment, and you can't exceed that to extend that for reservations, why is it that reservations exist in promotion when it comes to employment at the workplace? Why is it that? Shouldn't the reservations or the empowerment that is provided to the state to make reservations for the backward classes, isn't it only for the entry level, which is at the time of recruitment into public services? After that, they are on their own. This is where the court sided with Indra-Shawnee. The court was like, yes, Indra-Shawnee is correct on this part, that it shouldn't exist for promotions. It only should exist for the entry level, that the reservations in favor of the backward classes of Indian society should exist only at the entry level, at the time of recruitment into public services. This is where the constitution, this is where the Union Parliament came into place. The Union Parliament was like, oh, how do we break this deadlock? How do we break this problem? That is when the Constitution went for its 77th Constitution Amendment in the year 1995, in which the now behemoth Article 16, Clause 4A was introduced by the Union Parliament, where the state, be it the State Legislative Assembly or the Union Parliament, is empowered to make reservations, make special arrangements for reservations or promotions at workplace or at employment under the state, be it the Union Parliament or the State Legislative Assembly. The reservation exists in promotion according to the new constitutional amendments. So you see the Indrashani case gets tossed. The thing that was done in the Indrashani case gets tossed, because now the constitutional amendment, the 77th amendment, says that promotion exists. You can give reservation for promotion also. You can give, why not? If because there was an argument that was being made for the Indrashani case that as you go higher and higher in an employment, reservation should go lower and lower. That was an argument. However, the Union Parliament opined that even after so many years of reservation, even after so many years of providing reservation in entry level for backward sections of the society, they're still not being uplifted. There's some lag that is happening here. There is some problem that is happening here. Even after providing reservations, why are the backward classes of Indian society not being uplifted? That is when they came up with this provision that we have to provide a reservation even at the level of promotion, provided. Again, the constitution cannot be arbitrary in its approach. The constitution cannot be unreasonable in its approach. It has to be just, it has to be reasonable, it has to be non-arbitrary. So it said that this reservation that we're talking about in promotion that exists for employment under the State Legislative Assembly or the Union Parliament exists provided that scheduled tribe is not adequately represented. So let's assume you have a particular job, you have a particular employment where a scheduled tribe is not adequately represented, or the scheduled tribe has zero to none representation. For such areas, for such jobs, for such areas of employment, the Constitution in its 77 Amendment said that the Union Parliament is now empowering it to make reservations at the promotion level for such scheduled tribes which have inadequate representation for the particular job. Next. Now, the Indrashani case spoke about two things. One, what is a reasonable limit? We got an answer that it is 50, but it can be breached if we come across a peculiar community which requires special reservations. And the other thing it spoke about was, can reservations be held in promotions? Although the Indrashani case said no, the 77th Amendment of the Constitution by the Union Parliament said that it can, it will, provided the scheduled tribe is not adequately represented in the particular post or in the particular job under the State Legislative Assembly or the Union Parliament. Now, some people might not know the Indrashani case, but they know the M. Nagaraj case. Some people know the Indrashani case, but do not know the M. Nagaraj case. Because they sort of complement each other, not in its judgment. I'm not meaning that their judgments are so similar. It's because of the problems they tackle. Although the judgments of M. Nagaraj and others, the Union of India and others 2006, and that of the Indrashani case is very different, the problems it tackles is more or less the same. So the Supreme Court of India, in this case in 2006, the 5-judge constitutional bench consisting of Justice Y.K. Sabharwal, Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, Justice H.H. Kapadia, Justice C.K. Thakkar, and Justice P.K. Balasubramanian, they were like, Article 16 Clause 4A is valid. It's not invalid. if you have to look at the reread of what 4A says, it says that the provision for reservation in appointment and promotion can be done by the state if they are not adequately represented. This is okay. But at the same time, the M. Nagaraj and others case gave a test, a trilateral test, or an inspection to see if a given reservation is constitutionally valid. So let's assume the state, be it the Union Parliament, be it the state legislative assembly, makes a reservation policy. Is the reservation policy valid? Is the reservation policy constitutionally valid? That is tested by a trilateral test. That is done by a trilateral questioning as given by the M. Nagaraj and others case. How do we go about? Now, instead of going head on, let's not go head on to this. Let's try to understand it a little. A reservation policy for a particular scheduled tribe, let's assume the state legislative assembly, has now formed a reservation policy for a particular scheduled tribe. To know if it's constitutionally valid, it has to fulfill three criteria. One is that the scheduled tribe in question must be socially and educationally backward. They cannot be, they can't be rich people. They cannot be people who have everything, who are, from well-to-do backgrounds, who are educationally settled. You can't have a reservation policy for the uplifted. You ought to have the reservation policy to get the depressed sections of the society, to get the backward sections of the society to mainstream, to allow economical upliftment, to allow education upliftment for such people, for such individuals. So the scheduled tribe for which a reservation policy is being made needs to be socially and educationally backward. They ought to be socially and educationally backward. Second, the scheduled tribe in question should not have adequate representation in public employment. So, for example, if the State Legislative Assembly of Maharashtra has to make a reservation policy for a scheduled tribe ABC, if ABC is not adequately represented in the job for which the reservation policy is being made, then go ahead, the reservation policy is valid. But if the scheduled tribe is already adequately represented in the job for which the reservation is being taken, then there is no point. The scheduled tribe is already represented very adequately in the job in question, then why do we need reservation? So the reservation becomes null and void. Third criteria is that the reservation policy should not hamper the administrative efficiency of the state. Now, let's roll back to our example. So we have a job or we have an employment sector for which the state of Maharashtra, the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly, has made a reservation policy. Now let's assume that reservation policy is concerned with a scheduled tribe which is socially and educationally backward. It fulfills the first criteria. It is backward. It is also not adequately represented in the employment of that area for which reservation is being taken. But let's assume that a reservation, by providing reservations in that particular job, there is a possibility that the ill education, that the ill experience, that the backwardness of these tribes, of these scheduled tribes, can hamper the space, can hamper the pace, can hamper the efficiency, can hamper the effectiveness of the administration of the state of Maharashtra, then we say no. We say that the reservation policy cannot go through. Am I audible? I'm just asking in between. So
Yes, you are audible.
okay. So if that reservation policy that is being made by the state of Maharashtra, I have taken some members of the scheduled tribe under this reservation policy, but because of their ill background, because of their ill education, it causes hampering to the efficiency, to the administrative effectiveness of the state, then the very rational nexus for which I ought to have taken reservation is not fulfilled. So you see, these three criteria, which has been outlined in the M. Nagaraj and others, is so, it is so, it is, you know, um, so if I can take a pause real quick and I can, I did not know that this can be shared. Can I take, a pause? So I could share this with my people at Think India. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just asking. I saw the message now. So could I take like a 10 to 20 second break? I'll just share the link with them and ask the Think India also to join. Because I just received a message from Professor Madhavi. That
Sure,
it,
you can.
Sure.
You can.
Yeah.
okay. Thank you so much. I'll just take 10 seconds. It won't take long. Oh, thank you so much for that break. So we'll continue with the M. Nagaraj case. Um, is there a particular time limit for this session? I wasn't made aware of it.
Of course, sir, you take your time. No issues, no issues. But
Oh,
then, yeah, generally we do have it. It's okay, sir. You please continue. No,
sure.
no issues.
Thank you so much. So yeah, so these are the three criteria that M. Nagaraj said that if you have a reservation policy for a particular scheduled tribe, make sure they are socially and educationally backward, make sure they are not adequately represented, and make sure that their reservation itself does not hamper the administrative efficiency. Now, how do you know if a scheduled tribe is socially and educationally backward? So there will always be certain identifiable, objective, quantifiable data. There will always be information, there will always be data, there will always be certain factors that you can pick up on for which you can ascertain that a particular tribe is a scheduled tribe. Okay, there will always be quantifiable data. Now, this has obviously been argued by other states, it has been argued by other state legislative assemblies, where they have said that, how can you be so sure that there is identifiable, objective, and quantifiable data to show backwardness? But this is where the M. Nagaraj and others case has survived the test of time, in which this criteria that you need quantifiable data, you need objective identifiable data to show backwardness of a scheduled tribe is very important before you go ahead with its reservation policy. Okay. And the limitation, if you see in the previous case, in the Indra Shawnee case, we were talking about 50%. We were talking about a rigid limitation. And that is what, Even the judges in the case did not like. For example, Justice Pandian did not like that approach of having a rigid 50% because he thought, state-wise circumstances may vary. This was, this was annulled by a situation wherein the M. Nagaraj and others case said that maintenance of administrative efficiency acts as your constitutional limit to such a reservation. So you can provide reservation, you can provide a reservation to a scheduled tribe as long as it does not hamper the overall administrative efficiency of the state. The moment it starts hampering, the moment it starts hindering, the moment it starts slowing down the efficiency of the state is when you know you have breached the limit. So the limit here is no longer a number. The limit here is now administrative efficiency. It breaches, you know you have gone too high and you have to reel back your reservation policy. Okay. Now another case is which we can look at is the PGIMR VKL Narasimhan and another. It was a case that was fought in the Supreme Court in 1997. Let's assume an educational institution or an employment location as a single post cadre. Let's assume an educational institution ABC has a single post for an assistant professor, or let's assume IIT Bombay, for instance, has only one position for senior professor. And IIT Bombay decides to have a reservation for it. It's a single post and you have complete reservation for it. This, according to the PGIMR, KL Narasimhan and another, is unconstitutional. Such reservation is null and void. Because the moment you reserve a single post cadre for an entire scheduled caste or scheduled tribe or other backward classes, you have created 100% reservation. Essentially, think about it. If it's a single post cadre and you give the entire reservation to, say, a scheduled tribe, you have created a situation of 100% reservation, which is unreasonable. We saw in the M. Nagaraj case, we saw in the, even by the standards of Indra Shawni case, this is unreasonable. This is unreasonably above 50%. This cannot be taken into this 100% we're talking about. If you take by metrics of the M. Nagaraj case, it will hamper the efficiency, the effectiveness of the assistant professor, because now the assistant professor post or the senior professor post is no longer filled by merit. It is no longer filled by qualifications, rather it's filled by reservation alone. So you have hampered your own efficiency, you have hampered your own effectiveness. So by both, by Indra Shawni and M. Nagaraj standards, such reservations is null and void. Another case that we see is the Sadhana Devi and others, the state of Uttar Pradesh and others. It was a case fought in 1997, along the same, in the same year as the PGIMR case in the Supreme Court. A lot of people around that time, around the time of the Indra Shawni case, said that, you know what, let's not have this minimum criteria. A lot of the principal, especially the principal secretary in the state of Uttar Pradesh, in the government of Uttar Pradesh, said that for the admission of students in post-graduation programs for medical sciences, you needed a minimum 35% qualification in your qualifying exam. You needed a minimum of 35% to qualify. This is when the principal secretary of the government of Uttar Pradesh said, remove that. For members of the scheduled tribe who get 2% reservation for postgraduate courses in medical colleges, remove that 35%, remove that minimum qualifying marks. This is when Justice B.P. Jeevan Reddy and Justice S.C. Sen said that no, you can reduce it, you can reduce the qualifying marks, you can reduce the, you can relax the qualifying criteria, but you cannot nullify it completely. You can relax it for them, you can relax the criteria depending upon the educational standing of and the socioeconomic standing of the scheduled tribes. But in this case, you are saying to completely nullify the qualifying criteria of 35% in a written examination for, scheduled tribe. This is unconstitutional. It is not reasonable, both by the, by the Indra Shawni case at that time. So in a nutshell, if I have to sum up, if I have to do this arduous task of summing up what is Article 16 all about, Article 16 is the flag bearer of Article 14. Article 14 talks about equality before the law, about a situation where arbitrariness and reasonableness cannot go in the same ship. Article 16 does the same thing. It says that arbitrary classification, arbitrary discrimination, arbitrary differentiating classification, unreasonable reservations, arbitrary reservations in terms of employment, in terms of education institutions for the members of the scheduled tribe is cannot be upheld. No court of law will ever uphold an arbitrary and unreasonable reservation, be it in education, be it in employment. This is the thing that was used in the Sadhana Devi case. When the Sadhana Devi case came up to reduce or nullify the minimum criteria for written examinations, to get it to 0% from the 35% for the general category, they used this judgment, the judgment given by the Delhi Transport Corporation v. DTC Mazdoor Congress, in which Justice S. Mukherjee said that Article 16 has the non-arbitrariness and the reasonable clause intact, flag bone from Article 14. So you can't have unreasonable reservations, you can't have unreasonable and arbitrary reservations. And as we see in the M. Nagaraj, we have the three tests to see if it is unreasonable and unwarranted. Next, we go to protection of interest of minorities. Article 29, Clause 1 of the Indian Constitution talks about protecting the minorities, protecting the interests of the minorities. Now, we have seen that, you have certain provisions, public notification by which the President of India can declare a particular scheduled tribe, either residing in the entire territory or in a particular part of a state or union territory to be a scheduled tribe. Now the thing is, a minority, these tribes, the scheduled tribe can also be treated as a minority. In its essentiality, in its most essential and liberal interpretation, a scheduled tribe can also be looked out as a section or a part of Indian citizens who have a distinct script associated with them. They have a distinct language, they have a distinct culture. For example, if you go to certain parts of Maharashtra, they have a very different dialect. They have a different way of talking Marathi. They have a different language altogether. If you can, for the sake of argument. So, Article 29, Clause 1 says that these groups of citizens, by extension, including scheduled tribes, which have a distinct script, which have a distinct language, which have a distinct culture, they have the right to protect it. They have the fundamental right to conserve and protect their distinct language, their distinct culture, their distinct script. And in an effort to protect this language, in an effort to protect this script, okay, the right to conserve, the fundamental right to conserve one's language includes the right to agitate, includes the right of political agitation. So a scheduled tribe can take up, say, morchas, can take up peaceful marches, can take up political agitation. Because all this political agitation, the right to agitation, is upheld by the court of law as means used by minority communities, including the scheduled tribes, to protect their distinct script, distinct culture, distinct language. In the case of Jagdev Singh Siddhanti v. Pratap Singh Dolta, it was a 1964 case in the Supreme Court, where political aggression, political demonstrations done by scheduled tribes or minority communities in an effort to protect, promote, and safeguard their distinct language, script, and culture cannot be deemed as a corrupt practice. Next, we come to DPSP. Now, you might wonder that is it only a right? Is it only that the Constituent Assembly, that the Constitution of India has provided certain fundamental rights and freedoms, fundamental privileges to tribal communities? The answer is no. Article 46 of the Indian Constitution talks about, which is a directive principle of state policy, talks about two things that the state, be it the Union Parliament or the State Legislative Assembly, ought to do. A, it needs to protect, it needs to promote, it needs to promote the educational and economic interest. So if a minority community has a particular interest, has a particular economic interest, let's assume they are into toy making, or if they are into a particular, say, a particular kind of block printing, if they're into a particular kind of dance form, art form, or if they're in a particular kind of commercial activity, then it is the duty of the state under Article 46 to protect the economic interest of such a tribe or of such a scheduled tribe. At the same time, the education interest, as we have already seen in Article 15, Article 16, the state has to take measures, the state has to take programs, the state has to take initiatives in order to promote education, in order to make sure that education infiltrates and penetrates into the lowest and the most depressed and the most backward sections of Indian society. At the same time, the directive principle of state policy under Article 46 states that a state needs to protect a scheduled tribe, which is again notified publicly by a presidential order. It needs to protect it against social injustice. So you have discrimination is one of the social ills, it is one of the social injustices. So as we have seen, we have Article 15, we have the Union government, which added Article 16 clause 4A, which was added after the Hindustani case with the 77th Amendment. Then we have the Article 15 clause 4, which was added after the Champakant Dorai Rajan case in 1951 with the first constitutional amendment. So these social injustices, these discrimination that exist at employment and education institutions is something that the state is beautiful to protect you against. At the same time, the state is allowed, the state is asked to protect scheduled tribes against any forms of exploitation. At one end, you have to make sure that the scheduled tribe goes to school, that the scheduled tribe is getting its educational interests fulfilled, economical interests upheld. At the same time, the social injustices that they have to face in open society, the forms of exploitation that they have to face in Indian society, the paradigms that exist must be tackled as a duty under Article 46. Now, an extension to Article 46, a mirror to Article 46 is Article 335 in the Constitution of India, which talks about, imagine you have a scheduled tribe and the scheduled tribe claims certain reservations, or if it claims, what do you say, reservations in related to education, related to employment, then Article 335 clause 1 mandates the state to consider such claims. Just like it is the duty of the state as a directive principle of state policy under Article 46, it has to, uphold the economic interests of tribal communities. So when tribal communities claim, claim for appointments in connections with affairs of the state, such claims must be upheld. Such claims must be championed under Article 335. So Article 335, in a nutshell, makes sure that the state fulfills its duties. So 46 and 335 are very symbiotic in nature. 46 tells you about the duties of the state towards its scheduled tribes. 335 tells about methods, tells about provisions, tells about how the state can go about, be it at the Union Parliament, be it at the State Legislative Assembly, in order to fulfill its duty regarding the promotion and protection of scheduled tribes. So you can have, as we have already discussed in the previous cases and the previous judicial interpretations, you can have relaxation in qualifying marks in an examination. You can have lowering in the standards of evaluation for members of the scheduled tribe. But as we saw in the previous case, you can relax the qualifying marks, for general category, and for the ST, SC, OBC, EWS, you can have a relaxed qualifying marks. that does not mean you completely null it to zero. See, even Article 335 clause 2 very specifically says you can lower the standards of your evaluation from members of the scheduled tribes, but you cannot make it zero. Okay, you cannot. The reservations that you make for promotion of the economic interest of the scheduled tribe in connection with the affairs of the state has to be done by relaxing it. You in no condition can, you know, you in no condition can null it completely. You in no condition can make it zero because then it will become unreasonable. So whatever the state decides to, pay heed or to accept the claims made by the members of the scheduled tribe, these acceptance of those claims must be reasonable, must be arbitrary, must not be arbitrary. I'm so sorry, must not be arbitrary. Okay. So with this case, we will end our discussion. We will not get into the second part due to paucity of time. We will not get into the second part, which is legislative statutes. We will restrict ourselves to the constitution due to paucity of time. We will just finish up this case. This case, which is called the Lingappa Pochana Appalwar and others, and the state of versus the state of Maharashtra and another, is one of the most landmark cases when it comes to tribal rights, when it comes to scheduled tribes in India. It was fought in 1985, which was fought in the Supreme Court of India. The facts of the case are very simple. An appellant basically um, purchased a plot of agricultural land from from a respondent. The appellate and the respondent did an official sale deed. Prior permission of the district collector was also taken. However, however, the sub-divisional officer in that particular area realized that the respondent, the person who sold that property, belongs to the Gond tribe, a scheduled tribe. And this is when one of most important laws made in the state of Maharashtra came into play, called as the Maharashtra Restoration of Lands to Scheduled Tribes Act 1974. And this act dealt with the transfer of land or the transfer of property or the transfer of agricultural land from tribal communities, from you know, people from tribal communities to non-tribal areas. So this is when the sub-divisional officer realized, oh, this is a Gond tribe. This person who has sold the land is a person from a Gond tribe. So we need to pay heed. We need to understand it because now it falls under the purview of the Maharashtra Restoration Land to Scheduled Tribes Act. This is when the subdivisional officer took suo motu cognizance of the issue and immediately asked for a transfer of land from the appellant, which happened to be a non-tribal transferee, to the respondent, which happened to be a tribal transferor, under Section 3, Subsection 1, Clause 2 of the said Act. The appellant, again, as usual, went to the court and challenged the order given by the subdivisional officer about the suo motu cognizance. This is when Justice A.P. Sen upheld the decision taken by the subdivisional officer and said that this is distributive justice. Distributive justice deals with equalization of wealth. It deals with removing of disparities, removing of inequalities which exist within a particular society. So the subdivisional officer, by immediately asking for the reverse transfer of land from the appellant to the respondent, even in the face of the registered sale deed, is towards distributive justice, which is upheld by the Constitution of India in order to have fair division of wealth, in order to remove injustices which exist between, the richer sections of the society versus the scheduled tribes, to remove that oppression, to remove that bargaining imbalance. You think about it, no, the scheduled tribes in India, they are ill-educated, they have ignorance regarding the law, they are poor, they belong to poor sections of the society, and then their land is taken away by this affluent and powerful sections of the society who know the law, who are better educated, who are rich. This bargaining imbalance is redressed using distributive justice. So AP Sen said that the subdivisional officer did distributive justice, and this reverse transfer of land from the non-tribal transferee to the tribal transferor is valid. We will lastly look into Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly, and then we will, I think, call it a day for the entire session. So, Article 330 of the Indian Constitution talks about reservation of seats for scheduled tribes across the country in the Lok Sabha, in the House of the People. So, there are two situations here. One, if your scheduled tribe comes from a normal state
नहीं
or a
नहीं
union
बिट्टू भैया
territory,
बोला कि वही रखवा लो, वो मास्क पहन के आता नहीं, सॉरी.
um, is someone talking? Okay. Or the second situation can exist where the scheduled tribe can come from the autonomous region of Assam, both of which get reservation because they are scheduled tribes in the Lok Sabha, in the House of the People. Clause 2 of Article 330 talks about the scheduled tribes across states and union territories. Clause 3 talks about, the scheduled tribes which are located in the autonomous region of the state of Assam and their reservation in the House of People. So let's look at a simple math. This is the most simplified way you can understand it. Let's assume X happens to be the total number of seats which are reserved, for the scheduled tribe of a given state or a given union territory in the House of People or the Lok Sabha. Second, let's say Y is the total number of seats which are allotted to the given state or the given union territory in the House of the People. Let Z be the population of the scheduled tribe in the particular state or union territory. If you are considering the autonomous region of the state of Assam, then we consider the population of the scheduled tribe in the autonomous region of the state of Assam. And then we consider P, which is the population of the general people in that state or union territory. So for successful reservation of scheduled tribes in the House of the People, according to clause 2, for normal scheduled tribes across states and union territories, X is to Y, your X by Y has to be comparable to Z by Y. In cases of reservation for tribes from the autonomous region of Assam, X by Y has to always be greater than Z by P as given by clause 3. That is the proportion of the number of seats which are reserved in the House of People for a given scheduled tribe upon the total number of seats which are reserved for the particular state or the union territory in the House of the People must be equal in the case of a normal scheduled tribe, must be greater than for the autonomous region of the state of Assam than the population of the scheduled tribe in the particular state or the union territory upon the population, the entire population as decided by the preceding census of the entire state or union territory. Exactly same provision exists for the State Legislative Assembly. As you know, the State Legislative Assembly provisions in the Constitution of India mirror that of the Union Parliament. So Article 332 of the Indian Constitution talks about the reservation of scheduled tribes. In the State Legislative Assembly, Clause 1 talks about reservation of normal scheduled tribes in state legislative assemblies. Clause 2, on the other hand, talks about reservation of states in State Legislative Assembly of Assam for scheduled tribes coming from the autonomous region of Assam. The formula remains the same. It's an equality for normal state legislative assemblies, and it's a greater than equation for the autonomous region of Assam for the State Legislative Assembly of Assam, where again as a run X happens to be the number of seats reserved for the particular scheduled tribe in the state legislative assembly of the state they belong to. Y happens to be the total number of seats in the state legislative assembly itself. Z happens to be the population of the scheduled tribe in the state. If we are talking about the autonomous region of Assam, then Z will be the total population of the scheduled tribe in the autonomous region of Assam. And P is the total population of the state. So it's equality in case of normal, and it's greater than in the case of, the state legislative assembly of Assam. Now, we will again, because of paucity of time, I will pause here. I will pause here with an end note, which says that, Article 334 of the Indian Constitution specifically says that, reservation Lok Sabha or the state legislative assembly ends in 2030. Initially, it was for 60 years. It was supposed to end in 2010. Then it was extended to 70 years. It was supposed to end on 25th January 2020. Now it has been extended by the Constitution 126 Amendment Bill of 2019, which was introduced into the Lok Sabha by Union Minister of Law and Justice, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, on December 9, 2019. So the idea remains that the reservation that is so provided to members of the scheduled tribes in state legislative assemblies and the House of the People exists for 80 years after the commencement of the Constitution. We all know the Constitution commenced on 26th January 1950. So count 80 years from there. The reservation provision in these two houses of the legislative, be it state or the union level, ends on 25th January 2030. And with this, we end the provisions that exist for scheduled tribes across India. Due to paucity of time, we are not going ahead with, the National Commission, etc. But what we have covered indeed covers every constitutional provision that exists for the upliftment economically and socially for tribes, especially the scheduled tribes. I will just, if you want, I can share the PPT with your college authorities, and then you can have a look at it as and when required.
Sure, sir. Sure.
So do I stop here?
Really grateful. That would be really great, sir. If you can share your PPT also, we can see it's a wonderful research you have made.
So much.
Yeah. So shall we begin with a question answer session, if any?
Hello, good afternoon, sir. I'm audible to you, sir.
Yes, you're audible. Good afternoon.
Sir, what is your opinion with respect to effectiveness of relief and rehabilitation measures for the tribal groups, those who are displayed by the developmental project? Is National Commission fit to provide effective relief to these tribal people? What is your opinion, sir?
See, there's a very important case which answers your question, actually. It's called the Samatha v. State of Andhra Pradesh and others. It was a 1997 case. I would suggest you to actually look at that case. I will also give you my opinion, but do look at that case. That provides the exact answer to your question. Growth, and as India is growing, we are going ahead. A situation has arose in which people have realized, especially private enterprises and these organizations and entities, they have realized that a lot of these lands in which tribal communities reside, these forest lands, they have minerals in them. They're loaded with minerals. They have these, abundance of natural resources. So in the light of gaining profit, these tribal communities get displaced because now their forests are no longer seen with the view of subsistence, which is generally seen when it comes to tribal communities, that forests are their means of livelihood. Now, forest and the minerals, buried under those forests are seen as natural resources, as seen as, chariots of growth. But because of that, you have governmental organizations, you have private entities which are causing displacement of people. It was here when the Samata, filed a case against a similar situation which is happening in the districts of Vishakhapatnam, in which you have the state of the Andhra Pradesh government, which leased the land, the tribal land, to a private enterprise to conduct mining of certain materials. Now, to answer your question, laws can only go so far. Legislative statutes can only go so far. You can never have a blanket legislation. It's very, very difficult to have blanket legislation. So this is when the judiciary has to step in. This is when you and I, as lawyers, as future lawyers, take it upon ourselves to fill in those gaps. I'm not sure if you guys have learned jurisprudence, but there is a very, very famous theory in jurisprudence called as legal realism, which says that judicial interpretation is important. There are gaps that exist in legal theory. There are gaps that exist in law, because when laws are made, they're not made as per the future, they're made in reflection of contemporary times. So there exist gaps. So National Commission also has its gap. It was made in the year 2003. The situation was way different back then. Right now, we have the judiciary which has to step in, which it did in the case of the Samata and the other cases that have followed itself, in which we now need to understand that what is growth, what is development, and what is the limit at which it happens. You will be amazed to know that the Supreme Court took a very harsh decision in the case of Samata v. the state of Andhra Pradesh, in which the mining activity had to be stopped. The mining was called null and void, in which the land had to be given back to the tribal people, or a rehabilitation, or you know a restitution of equal value had to be provided. And the state was first supposed to take care of the welfare of its tribes. You saw the directive principle of state policy. It is their duty to protect the tribe. How can a state then sell or lease a particular land to go and violate the rights and privileges of the tribe? You see, your state government cannot do two things. It can't act for the welfare of the people and behind their back not act for the welfare of the people. So the Supreme Court said that you ought to act for the welfare of the people first, and then for your private enterprises for growth. So welfare comes over growth in such situations. I would always suggest you to look into the judgment of Samata v. the state of Andhra Pradesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question from
Thank-
Vijaydeep.
Yeah. So should I read out or you will
So I'll just read it out. So it says that, sir, tribal community is continuously converting other religions like Christianity and Hinduism. Are there any anti-conversion laws in India? Unfortunately, Vijayji, the answer is no. We at Think India Tribal Rights Forum have really taken upon ourselves to. There's a tribe in the state of Chhattisgarh called the Halwa tribe. If some of you are from Chhattisgarh, there is, if you look into the Halwa tribe, they are completely forest dependent. They do hunt even today, but they are always seen with this neoclassical view of what it means to be progressive, what it means to be uplifted, what it means to be civilized. So in case of this neoclassical lens, the Halba tribe remains to be a not literate or a not progressive community. Now, in the face of conversion, no, we can't say that. Religion is a free privilege in India. The Constitution provides you freedom of religion. However, laws can be taken into consideration where most of these people are converted under coercion or under misrepresentation. Most of them are converted not knowing what Christianity or Hinduism actually means. They do not know what the paradigm of religion actually means. So maybe there could be situations where they are made to understand what the religion means before converting. But as such, India does not support anti-conversion laws because religion is seen as a wider interpretation in India. You have the liberty, you have the freedom to undertake religion. Do we have any other?
Do we have any other questions on the floor?
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so we have a question which says that the creamy layer criteria absent for employment and education for the SC/ST. Don't you think, sir, this actually widening the gap? Now, the thing with the creamy layer, Gajanan, is that the Indrashoni case, the more you read about the Indrashoni case, you realize its various loopholes. The 77th Amendment came into place, and basically whatever the Indrashoni case tried to do, it just reverted it. So yes, the absence of a clean layer criteria in employment does cause issues, but if you look into it, this creamy layer concept has only been looked into when you talk about the Indrashoni case. If you decide to look it through the lens of the M. Nagaraj case, you can see that reservation policies or maintaining reservations in employment, promotions, education institutions has now criteria. Instead of reverting yourself, instead of resorting to just creamy layer, something as abstract, as vague as what is a creamy layer, now you have three objective, definite, factual criteria in order to see if those reservations are valid or not. So creamy layer as a concept, actually, I would go out of my breath to say this, and I might receive backlash for this, but I myself do not believe that the creamy layer concept exists anymore after the M. Nagaraj case. The M. Nagaraj case went miles ahead in understanding what the reservation means, how a reservation can, strengthen uh, atrocities that reservation itself. Yes, if you think about it, in the Indrashoni case, we never looked into if a reservation goes against itself. Can a reservation thwart its own image? Can a reservation create a situation where the objective it wishes to fulfill do not get fulfilled? It didn't talk about it. But the M. Nagaraj case went ahead, used foresight to say that there are situations where reservations can thwart the very machinery it chooses to make efficient and effective. So I would suggest look at these questions from the lens of the M. Nagaraj case. It's a better interpretation. It's a better way of looking at it. Do we have
Sir,
anyone else?
sir,
Yes.
just you have said any person of ST category can convert in any religion, and he will be able to get all facilities of scheduled tribes. How it is possible, sir? Because when he converts in other religions, he adhered to that customs of that religion. Then how he able to get the facilities from scheduled tribe category?
Okay. It's a very good question, but the
Yes, sir.
solution to the question exists in the case itself, which was the state of Kerala case, in which the judge very, very specifically said that go ahead, get converted, go to another religion. But if at any moment of time you stop following the customs, the traditions of the tribal community, and you start solely following the customs and traditions of the converted religion, you lose your status as a scheduled tribe. That is that fine line. And this is decided by the Gram Sabha, by the way. The Gram Sabha decides this, or you have executive machinery which decides this. But if the Gram Sabha is of the opinion that yes, this person, so and so person, has converted to another religion, has stopped following the customs of the religion, no longer will the person be entitled to scheduled tribe status. It will go away. It is a contingent situation.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
No issue.
Thank you so much, sir, for making familiar with the jurisdictional view of tribal rights. This session was so thoughtful and really stunned by your immense knowledge on tribal rights. Now I would like to call Isha Parekh for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Isha. Good afternoon, one and all present over here. I, Isha Parekh, take this privilege to express vote of thanks in the guest lecture on the status of tribal rights in India. First of all, I am grateful to Think India Tribal Forum for extending all support and cooperation for organizing this lecture by collaborating Firat College. With our college, we are thankful to our respected guest speaker, Mr. Vikrant Perse, for sparing his valuable time and guiding us on the status of tribal rights in India. Apart from the encouragement machinery, internalizing the fact, creating awareness of it surely helps in changing and upgrading social values. Thank you so much for this such an informative and enlightenment talk. I would like to extend my gratitude to respected principal ma'am of our college, Dr. Ujjwala Shinde ma'am, for her valuable support and guidance. I'm grateful to Dr. D.Y. Patil Unitech Society for their unconditional support and encouragement for organizing such co-curricular activities. Last but not the least, I appreciate all students for being patient listener. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Feedback list is posted in the post box. All are requested to fill that link. Thank you.
Excuse me. There's a feedback form which also my Think India provides. So can I also post it in the chat box here, or should I provide it another way?
You can post it over here only, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll just do that.
Or else you can forward it to me, and I'll get a feedback and I'll provide it to you. Don't worry. I mean, as students might be leaving, as it's, of course, like it's 4. So you can just provide it to me. I'll revert you back. It's there? Great.
Yeah, I just provided it. It has the feedback part of
Thank you
it.
so much.
So I would like to know how the session went for a lot of you. And again, thank you to Dr. D.Y. Patil College for organizing such a session. It's extremely important for both academic academia and students to know about tribal rights. So extremely thankful to everyone who patiently listened to everything, to the faculty who patiently listened to everything. I understand this is Friday evening time, so thank you so much, and extending my heartiest thank you to everyone. Stay safe. These are tough times we live in because of the COVID pandemic and all. So I hope everyone does well, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.